وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Bismillah amma ba'd. Inshallah, we'll start our Q&A session for today. So I have a few questions that were sent to me a few minutes ago that I can start with. And then we can have a few live questions, inshallah. I plan to keep the session short and get to the point, inshallah. So make sure your questions as well are clear, concise, and to the point, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. So regarding the questions I received beforehand, I have a few here. I'll start with the first one. Somebody asks, is it permissible to have a dog as a pet if I keep it out of the prayer room? Regarding keeping dogs as pets, the majority of the scholars don't allow this unless they are used for hunting and herding and guarding the house and these type of things. Some scholars are a little bit more lenient, more particularly the Maliki scholars, or some Maliki scholars. But in general, I would not advise keeping a dog as a pet unless you have a purpose for that dog. A purpose regarding the house or the farm or whatever the case may be. Because there are hadith that mention the prohibition of keeping dogs as pets and the possibility of reward being diminished from you. So that's the first question. The second question, what is the ruling of giving advice in Islam? And in case someone was doing a haram thing, how to advise them and how if public? So giving advice in Islam, it depends on what you mean by advice. So there's different levels of advice. So are we speaking about advice regarding something that is haram? Okay. If that's the case, something haram or wajib, then the advice is at the level of al-amr bil ma'ruf and nahy anil munkar. The advice is at the level of ordering or encouraging the good and forbidding the evil, which is, the scholars have mentioned, obligatory. So if it's about stopping haram and these type of things, then that's a higher level of advice. And so you mentioned if somebody's doing something haram, then it's obligatory for you to try and stop that haram if possible, and if you have the possibility and the knowledge and authority and so on and so forth. So there's conditions to that, of course. And some scholars mention this is not necessarily obligated for you yourself if others are doing it. So for example, if somebody else is advising regarding this haram, then you don't have to do it. This is a difference between fard ayn and fard kifaya. So the scholars differ whether it's fard ayn or fard kifaya, whether it's an individual obligation to stop haram and these type of things, or is it a community obligation? So meaning if the community does it, then not everybody has to do it. So that's the first thing. Second thing, if you can speak about advice at a lower level, such as advising regarding, adab, for example, like behaviors or character or recommendations or makruh things. So this, of course, should be done with what we call lutf, meaning with gentleness, and it should as most as possible, if we could say, or as much as possible, sorry, should be done in private and not in public, in order to not give the person receiving the advice the idea or the impression that they're being like humiliated or called out or something like that. So people usually accept advice easier when it's done in private and not in public. So there's conditions to advice, and it also should be based on knowledge. So if you don't have the knowledge regarding the issue, then you shouldn't advise, and you should only advise based on knowledge. So that's, and the same goes for higher level advice. Al-amr bil ma'ruf wa nahy anil munkar. Same goes for that. You should try to do so gently as much as possible. And you should try to do so with a good intention. Advice means iradatul khair lil ghayr in Arabic. To want good for other people. So you should have that intention. And I always remember the story of one of my mashayikh in Medina. He said one time we were driving and we saw a brother smoking. So we stopped and we gave him da'wah, we spoke to him and we said, brother, listen, we love you fi sabilillah. We see you smoking and it bothers us because we know you're destroying your health and this is so bad for you, and we do this because we love you and we care about you. So they really came from a point of view or an aspect of love and care. And the brother was smoking. He said, Wallahi, I'll never smoke after this again. So he was convinced and resolved to not go back to smoking. So the nasiha had an effect on him. So that really should be the intention of how we give nasiha. Allahu alam. Now, next question: if birthday gifts are, or sorry, I missed one. I skipped a question. As a Muslim, if you have a non-Muslim family member that is passing away, how would you pray for them? Can you ask that they be forgiven? So no, you cannot ask that they be forgiven because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, مَا كَانَ لِلنَّبِيِّ وَالَّذِينَ آمَنُوا أَن يَسْتَغْفِرُوا لِلْمُشْرِكِينَ وَلَوْ كَانُوا أُولِي قُرْبَى. That it's not up to the Prophet nor the believers to seek forgiveness for the mushrikeen, even if they are close family members. مِن بَعْدِ مَا تَبَيَّنَ لَهُمْ أَنَّهُمْ أَصْحَابُ الْجَحِيمِ. After it has become clear that they are companions of the fire, meaning that they have died upon kufr. Meaning that once a non-Muslim dies, we're not allowed to ask forgiveness. Even though you might have that instinct, the Prophet had it and others in the past, because it's close family members, but this is prohibited by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran. So you can't ask for forgiveness. Some scholars, they allow demanding or asking rather to lessen the punishment, but this is like a little bit contentious. So yeah, once a non-Muslim family member passes away, it's very sad. And the best you can do is hope that maybe they died upon Islam. And if you're sure they didn't, then some scholars say you can pray for a lesser punishment. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best if that's correct or not. Next question: if birthday gifts are haram, is it permissible to use money given to me indirectly? Example, my father accepted a birthday gift on my behalf despite my objection. Can I donate this money to a masjid or Islamic cause, or use it in non-cash forms instead? Yes, the original principle the scholars mentioned, it's not allowed to accept birthday gifts based on the fact that birthdays are considered non-permissible. So that's the original principle. If you feel like accepting this gift will, if you feel like rejecting the gift rather, will cause problems with, the friend or the family member, if you think that this will cause like a conflict, then here the scholars say you can accept the gift. It's not that big a deal. But originally you're not supposed to, because it's like saying that you approve of the celebration, whether it's birthday or whatever occasion. So it's like indirectly or even directly approving of it. Yeah, so it's not originally allowed, but if you fear conflict or like a huge issue coming out of it, then here the scholars say exceptions can be made. And if so you can benefit from it and use it. If you wish to donate it, that's not a bad thing either. That's always a good thing. Donations in general are good. So you can donate to whatever cause or masjid. You can give it away as well if you want to take the route of donation. You don't have to give it to masjid. You can donate to anybody and have the niyyah of like doing takhallus, like getting rid of it. This is if you believe it to be impermissible based on your situation. Now, I think those are all the questions that were given to me beforehand. I can now move on to the live questions, inshallah. So I'll have a look here at the live questions that I can see in the chat. So I'll take 15 minutes, inshallah, to get to these or to go through these live questions from the chat. Okay, first question. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Is it permissible to use this keychain when entering the bathroom? And the person here put a keychain that has like the Kaaba on it. And it says Mecca in English. Response to this, it's allowed because what's not allowed is going to the bathroom with the mustahabb or the Quran or ayat of the Quran or even the name of Allah. And there's some tolerance for this. There's like, for example, the name of Allah unlike money. Like, you have the name of kings or rulers, and sometimes the name of Allah, you get from that the name of Allah, like Abdullah, King Abdullah and these type of things, and that's in the money, and you go to the bathroom with that. So this is tolerated. And some scholars say, and the Hanbali scholars say, for example, that everything is makruh. All of these things are makruh except for the mushaf, which is haram. You can't go to the bathroom with a mushaf, meaning a physical copy of the Quran. So this is allowed. The most you could say about it, it's makruh, or maybe it's like, for example, it should be avoided. It's khilaf al-awla. It's better to avoid it out of respect. But if you do it, it's not a big deal, inshallah ta'ala. So the main prohibition is regarding the mushaf and the book of Allah. Somebody asked, what's the ruling on being friends with the kuffar if you try to give them da'wah every time you hang out? If you are friends with kuffar with the niyyah of da'wah, then that is permissible. As long as you're clear on your religion, your wala al-bara, and as long as you stay away, you avoid the haram that may come with this friendship. And as long as this friendship doesn't become like too close, meaning that you start to love the person for their religion or their beliefs. So that's an exaggeration that is not allowed and should be avoided. But in general, yes, you are allowed to be friends with the kuffar with the niyyah of da'wah and bringing them closer to Islam. The next question, what's the best way to attach yourself with books of knowledge? That's a good question. I could make an entire lecture on just this topic. If I were to give a quick response, I would say try to fall in love with the books of knowledge. I don't know how you would do that, but you need to read books of knowledge that you're really interested in. So you need to be passionate about it. That's the only way to attach yourself to books of knowledge. If you're not passionate about it, then you're going to have some trouble. So find ways to be passionate about it. Increase your passion, increase your love for the books of knowledge, and it'll be easier to be attached to them. One of my favorite things in terms of being attached to the books of knowledge is reading the biographies of the scholars and the Salaf. And so that I know when I read the books of knowledge, these are the people that these books came from. They're amazing people, such as the past scholars and the Salaf. So that makes it very passionate. That makes it very passionate for me in terms of um, attachment to the scholars and books of knowledge. Now, next question: do you have advice? Do you have to advise? Do you have to advise every single person on the internet if they're doing haram? There are so many people who have incorrect hijab or using music in their videos. No, you don't, unless nobody is doing it, and unless you are in a particular situation, like unless you are engaging with that person already. If you were to if you were to advise all the people on the internet that you're not engaging with in the first place, then you would have no life. So if you really think that somebody needs advice and nobody else is doing it or giving them advice and you're engaging with that person, then here we can say that it could be mustahabb, it could be recommended, and maybe in some cases obligatory to advise. And no one knows best. No. Next question, Shaykh. Women should pray behind men in salat, but is it allowed for opposite genders to pray beside each other at a distance if there is no room to pray behind? If the room is small or if they don't pray, they will miss the salat. Barakallahu fikum. Now, so this question is, can men and women pray side by side? Of course, separated. Okay, so men on one side and women on one side, but where the women are not behind the men, but they are side by side with the men. So this is a khilaf of the fuqaha, of the ulama. Many scholars allow this with certain conditions. For example, there has to be separation. So you have to put a space between the two, so between the men and the women, to like distinguish, to make that distinction, and stuff like this. So this is what some scholars mention. Other scholars mention other things. But some scholars allow this, and if you do so because there's a need to do so, like you mentioned, small room or possibly missing salat, then it's not that big a deal. So if you're able to pray behind, if women are able to pray behind the men, that is ideal. If not, then they can do this, pray side by side, inshallah. But of course, to make that distinction by separating both parties. Okay, next question. If say my father dies, so somebody asks, if say my father dies as a non-Muslim, if I make dua to Allah to send my father to Jannah, can he still go to Jannah? We already answered this, and no, if a family member dies as a non-Muslim, then we cannot ask Allah to make that person go to Jannah, because that would be like asking Allah to forgive that person. And that is not allowed, as we mentioned earlier, and we mentioned the verse and the evidence for that. So that is not allowed. And don't think that the Prophet was not in this boat as well. The Prophet lost one of the most dearest people to him, which is Abu Talib, his uncle. And keep in mind, his uncle was like his father almost. He was basically his father. Because the Prophet ﷺ never knew his father. His father died when the Prophet was still in the womb. So he never met his father. So the person who took care of him, who raised him, who was by his side, was Abu Talib, his uncle. So he was like his father. They were so bonded together, they were so close. They had so much love between each other that when the Prophet ﷺ was a child, he was young, and Abu Talib would go on business travel, the Prophet would cry and beg to go with him. So this is the amount of love that they had for each other. And yet, Abu Talib did not die upon Islam, he died upon kufr. He died as a non-Muslim. And that made the Prophet ﷺ very sad. So what certain reverts are going through, the Prophet himself has been through as well. To lose a family member who is not upon Islam. And this is just life. You can't guide everybody. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, إِنَّكَ لَا تَهْدِي مَنْ أَحْبَبْتَ وَلَكِنَّ اللَّهَ يَهْدِي مَنْ يَشَاءُ. You cannot guide the people you love, or you don't necessarily control the guidance of the people you love. Rather, it is Allah that guides whoever He wills. So we have to accept the qadr of Allah. It's definitely sad. And as long as they're alive, we have to try our best to bring them to Islam and to ask Allah and make dua that they are guided. So may Allah make it easy for all of us. As a revert, I definitely understand myself. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make it easy upon us and to guide our non-Muslim family members. Ameen. Next question. I had a friend that reverted, but now I've been told by kuffar acquaintances that she left Islam and is doing atrocious sins, which I'm seeing over the internet. Do I take their takfir as true? I don't know why you would. I mean, it's up to you. Like, it's not important. You don't have to takfir. You don't have to declare takfir or anything like this. You know, this is not like an obligation for you. If there's a need, the scholars will declare takfir on a person if there's a need for that, like publicly. If in your heart you see kufr, somebody doing kufr or has left Islam clearly, then yes, you can consider that person a kafir, of course. But you should always base yourself on evidence and not just what people tell you, unless they are people of high trustworthiness. Now, next question. Assalamu alaikum, Shaykh. Can you please advise what one should do if you're Muslim and own a dog? What about passages of Quran on a keychain? Can it be paraphrased? So we spoke about these things already. Regarding the dog. So you should go consult the audio or the YouTube video of this, inshallah. As for passages of Quran and a keychain, I would advise against that. It's not necessarily a problem. It's not necessarily haram, but it can open certain doors to haram because people start taking these things as amulets. If you have Quran on a keychain, you have like some verses, and you want to remind yourself of that verse, for example, you want to see it often, this is great actually. This is a good thing. But unfortunately, the fact that you put it around your neck and stuff like this resembles amulets, and people go into extremes and exaggerations when it comes to amulets to the point where they believe that they have certain powers. So I would advise against that. And the scholars differ on the issue of having amulets and keychains with Quran. And the scholars in general, the majority seem to agree that this is makruh, or at least should be avoided and left off now, for the reasons that I mentioned. Next question: is mustahabb and sunnah the same thing? Because if one leaves them, there is no sin, and if one does them, they get reward. Now, mustahabb and sunnah are the same thing, but it depends on what you mean by sunnah. So sunnah can have many meanings. Sometimes sunnah means mustahab, meaning recommended. Sometimes sunnah means something else. It depends on the context and how you use it and where you use it. Sometimes sunnah means aqidah. Okay, sometimes sunnah means aqidah. Like in the books of the Salaf, they had books called Kutub al-Sunnah or Kitab al-Sunnah, which is a book of aqidah mainly. And sometimes sunnah means the actions of the Prophet, like the hadith, actions of the Prophet, sayings of the Prophet, and so on. So mustahabb and sunnah are the same thing in general when it comes to the context of fiqh, like the books of fiqh and so on. When we say sunnah, usually it means that it's mustahab, and this is in the books of fiqh. But in other contexts, it's not necessarily the same thing. Next question: what books of knowledge would you recommend? This is too general, so it depends on can you read Arabic or not. What level of reading are you at? Do you understand Arabic? Do you have certain background and knowledge? All of these things change the advice or the ruling on the question. Now, sorry, I lost the question here. Okay, yeah. So, what books of knowledge? So once again, it really just depends. So everybody has different books that they can read at their level. If you have some advanced, not advanced, but if you have some basic Islamic knowledge, then it's good to read, like I said, the biographies of the Salaf, such as Siyar al-Alam al-Nubala by Dhahabi, Siyar al-Alam al-Nubala. the biographies of the noble people or the noble individuals. Books of tafsir as well are important if you have some Arabic. And if you don't, then you should read tafsir at least in English. Tafsir is very important. So yeah, and books of fiqh as well, like all the important stuff. Um, Somebody asks, "What can one wear this accessory on his suit, or is it considered imitating women?" Honestly, Allahu A'lam, I'm not sure. This could depend on the culture. Imitation of women can depend many times. Sometimes it's clear, it's like universal, and sometimes it's linked to culture and particular context. So this I'm not sure about. However, if it contains like gold or silver or stuff like that, then this is not allowed for men. So I'm not sure if it contains actual gold, like real gold. If that's the case, then it would not be allowed for men. Okay, I think I'll end here, inshallah. I see people are writing. I'll take like one or last two questions, and then we'll call it a day, inshallah ta'ala. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Brother asks, how to memorize hadith? Should we just memorize the hadith or the source as well? Bukhari, Muslim, etc. The most important thing is to memorize the hadith. The source is important as well, but that's not the priority unless you want to be a more advanced student of knowledge. So you want to have to back yourself up with like the evidence, the source, or the traceability of the hadith. So of course, the stronger a student of knowledge you are, and the more you will have knowledge of the source of the hadith. But that's not the main priority. The most important thing is to memorize the words of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and to understand them and to try to apply them in your everyday life. So that's the first part. Then if you want to go deeper into that, if you have time and energy to go deeper, then you should, of course, as well memorize the sources such as Bukhari, Muslim, etc., etc. The best way to memorize hadith is to start with a small matan and then to move on to a medium-sized matan and then to keep moving on to like a larger matan. And this, you could do this in different ways. Usually people say start with 40 hadith of Nawawi, then you move on to Umdatul Ahkam, something like that. Umdatul Ahkam are books that are similar. Then you move on to like Bulugh al-Maram or Al-Muharrar. And then you move on to like Al-Jam'u Bayn al-Sahihain. You move on to like memorization of Bukhari and Muslim, or the abridged versions that combine both Bukhari and Muslim. There are many books that do this in order for the student to memorize. So that's one way. Some people, they skip. They start with Nawawi and Umda and go maybe straight to Sahihain, whatever it is. The best is to have advice of a sheikh that knows you and can advise you on what the best methodology. But this is generally like what people do. They start with a small book and then they just keep leveling up. So may Allah make it easy. I see there are responses to the questions. So I don't like to take too many responses to my responses, because then it becomes like a conversation and it's just never ending. But the brother asks, or maybe sister, I'm not sure, if anything other than silver or gold is either permissible or better not to wear it. Now, if it's other than silver or gold for men, it's permissible on the condition that it's not imitation of women or imitation of kuffar or something haram. So if there are no haram elements, then permissible. But what we have to determine is are there any haram elements or not. So that could be a possibility. Barakallahu feekum. I think we'll end here, inshallah ta'ala. Jazakumullah khairan. Okay, I'll take one last question. After this, we'll end. Somebody asks, Shaykh, how should one decide whether to focus on memorizing a lot of Quran and learning meaning, applying it later, or memorizing a small amount first and applying its meaning before continuing memorization? So this is a question regarding the memorization of Quran and how to apply what you memorize. If we look at what the Salaf and the scholars, the early scholars used to do, they used to be more inclined to take their time in memorizing and focus on application, on practice of what they memorize. And I think that's probably the best way to go, unless you have the opportunity to keep on memorizing and you feel like, maybe you're not able to adapt your practice exactly. So, but the focus should always be on the practice. If you're able to memorize more, then by all means do so. But do not forget the do not forget the objective or the priority, which is to practice what you memorize, inshallah. So yeah, it really just depends. But the original rule is that one should take their time in memorizing in order to try and practice, because that is the objective, is to practice what we learn. Now, Jazakumullah khairan to all, and I'll end here inshallah, and we'll see each other soon for the next session. أقول قولي هذا أستغفر الله لي ولكم فاستغفروه إنه هو الغفور الرحيم وآخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.